Hello. Hello, everyone. Very nice to see everybody. I'm Jane Bryan, and welcome to our first of our live events for the Reunion Reimagined class of for the 2021. We hope this is the last one we'll have to do completely virtually, but we're super excited to be able to do panels like this. And I'm very thankful to all our wonderful panelists and to Erin Canaan, who's the Vice President for Civic Engagement and has been a Bard for quite a while, as well as I have. And I'm going to turn it over to Erin, but thank you very much. And if you have questions, put them in the chat. We're also recording this, and we'll make it available for people who couldn't be here today. But thank you so much. And over to you, Erin. Thanks.
Thanks, Jane. Thank you everyone for coming and experimenting with us, trying to highlight all of the wonderful work that our students have been doing before COVID, in the before times, and during COVID, and what some exciting things that we have planned for hopefully our post-COVID experience. Just a little bit of background. Some of you may have been here during the time of civic engagement and Bard's move to really reimagine what private institutions can do in the public interest. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to turn the floor over to our wonderful panelists, and then we're going to open up for question and answer. So the Center for Civic Engagement, which is one of the sort of cornerstones of civic engagement at Bard, was launched 10 years ago. So we're now celebrating our 10th anniversary. And it really emerged from a discussion about all of the different institutional engagements that the college was doing that had really started back in 1999 when the Soviet Union fell, and we started our partnership in Russia through Smolny University. And so since that time, we've really been growing our footprint and our identity as an institution that is acting on behalf of the public. And so you've probably heard about the Bard Prison Initiative, which started shortly after shortly after our international programs. And then our early college programs, which started around the same time in 2000. And then since then, we have been encouraging students in Annandale to really think about their own sense of agency and independence and leadership. And that has, through our TLS program, and that has really become what we foster at Bard, students' sense of agency and leadership and acting in the world. And so they sort of study that in their classes, and then they bring that to life out in the communities. And so we feature here today a few students and a few alums, recent alums, very recent alums, and their work. But first, what I wanted to do is show you a video. We were part of something called Peace One Day, Anti-Racism Day in the spring. And we created a video as part of a collaboration with an organization, a transnational organization, and the UN. And what it does is it really sort of captures in 90 seconds a bit about what we do in the world as an institution. And then I'm going to let the students talk about what they do in the world as individuals. So I'm going to share my screen, the old share your screen thing, and it takes a second to do that. Hopefully this is, you can all see this. And then hopefully it will play without incident. So here we go. So for those of you who just joined, that was a video that we made as a collaboration with a transnational organization that we worked with in the UN. And so I see now from Jahari, maybe you did you not get the video or the, did you not hear it?
No.
Sorry. Awesome. Okay, sorry about that. So you missed that part, but we can certainly share it. And I'm not sure why that didn't work, but we are, essentially our footprint is very local, national, and international now in a way that really I think has redefined the student experience and has really informed our practices in a way that make campus life a little bit different in terms of access to different opportunities. And so we wanted to feature students who have taken advantage of that here today. And so what I'm going to do is we have started a podcast called What is Your Why? And we're just interviewing students about why they decide to, what motivates them to act and to use their time in this way. And we've had about 5 series so far, and we're really targeting incoming first-year students so they get a sense of what it is that students spend their time doing. But it's been a wonderful opportunity for us to reflect on what it is that we're doing. And so I'm going to start with that as our first question. What is your why? And I have a kind of order that we're going to go through. That's going to be our first sort of intro question. Instead of me introducing each person, I'm going to take their bio and put it in the chat so you can kind of read through it so we don't take up our time doing that. And then what we're going to do from there is we're going to open the floor up for some questions. I have some additional questions. And I'm hoping that our panelists themselves might have questions for each other so we can make this a little bit more of a conversation. So Jahari, I'm going to start with you because you're still a student and you have not yet graduated. So I'm going to start with the sort of current student experience. So here's Jahari's bio. So Jahari, I want you to answer the question, what is your why?
Thank you, Erin. Hello, everyone. So I guess what is my why? I think before coming to Bard, I guess I can start with that precursor. I attended a Jesuit high school, a Jesuit Catholic school that really placed a huge emphasis on being men and women for and with others. So service, and I didn't really, I would just, get involved and do things like campus ministry and student government, not knowing how much those values would, I guess, impact me in the future. But when I was looking for a college or university, Bard really stood out. One, because of their huge emphasis on civic engagement, but also I applied as a Posse Scholar, which is a full tuition leadership scholarship. So the two really just kind of went together. And I knew that, in addition to the writing, the writing skills that I would gain here, that this would be a perfect place for me. But as to the question of what's my why, I think since high school, it's kind of been, I guess, helping others realize their full potential is how I like to word it. But then also, just trying to make as much impact as I can by working with others and just, doing things that finding things that other people are passionate about as well, and working together to I guess, obtain any goal. But I think since being at Bard, I've been a peer counselor, a tour guide, and starting my TLS project, but then also this fall, I'll be the incoming speaker of the student body. And I think all of these roles have really just allowed me to connect with people in the best way I can and in a very natural way. And Bard has really just provided that space for me to do so. Being a peer counselor, you really get to talk with residents. And with my TLS project, I work with students on the autism spectrum, doing fine motor and sensory skill lessons. And these are students who, they surprise me every time I'm working with them because you never know, I think a lot of times when you're not working with certain groups or just not doing certain you don't have experience with certain things, you have, some sort of misconceptions about how they could be. And I think definitely working with students on the spectrum has been just a spectacular experience for me, just because, they can place kind of just not knowing what what each student can do because they're all different. And I think that just makes it even better because it's really representative of even BARD or the world. Everyone has a different skill set, a different talent, something that they can bring to the table. And I feel like not everyone always realizes what their talent is or what their gift is. And I think that's kind of been something I've just enjoyed doing, is helping other people realize what they're passionate about, and helping, working together to kind of create some vision. But yeah, I think BARD has really provided that space for me, especially through my TLS projects. So.
Thank you, Jahari. I'm just going to include, Jahari, this is your poster that you made last year for the Get Engaged conference that we were not able to do. So annually we typically have about 40 students from all of our international partners attend a conference called the Get Engaged conference. Sakina and Kathy are both alums from that conference, but we join together in Budapest and have a week-long immersive program. And we've been doing that online, obviously, since COVID. So that's a little bit about, if you want to read a little bit about Jahari's project. Next, I'm going to turn the floor over to Kathy Guetta, who's a new, freshly minted alum. And I'm going to put her bio in the chat. And Kathy, I'm going to ask you, what's your why? If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everybody, and thanks so much for having me on this panel. So as a little bit of background, and the bio is also in the chat, I am the team leader, or was the team leader, of Election at BARD, which is the student-run organization on campus that does voter education and engagement year-round, not just during major election seasons. But I really came to this work in my freshman year at BARD and sort of seeking a community and something to participate in. And like speaking politically, I was always interested in politics, but voting necessarily was never a huge part of my life. My parents weren't able to vote, so that was not something that, was instilled in me from a young age. But when I was able to vote, I was interested in how voting can further participate with other advocacy and other activism rather than it just being, an act in and of itself. And I really was drawn to Election at BARD and the work that we do because it brings together, I think, the BARD community, not just around voting, but around the larger space and around the larger education that can be done around our political system and around issues that people are interested in. I think also part of my why and why I'm so interested in this work is because we are consistently seeing efforts to disenfranchise voters, whether they be young voters, whether they be people of color in this country. We keep seeing efforts to disenfranchise voters, and they're so often swept under the rug or put under this guise of, oh, this is politics and we won't understand it, et cetera, et cetera. And so what I really wanted Election at BARD to do was to destigmatize that and to really get into the nitty-gritty of well, here's how we can ensure that the vote is protected, whether that be, through your everyday voter registration or whether that's education about the issues. So that is why I was so drawn to the work that we're doing and why I'm excited that people are going to continue this work now that I've graduated as well.
Thank you. And I don't know if you've tracked at all the polling site battle that's been happening, but we've been trying to get a polling site on campus, and we are, I think, approaching maybe our third or fourth lawsuit in Dutchess County to secure students' right to vote over the last 20 years or so. So now we're going to move. So Kathy's moved away. So Jahari's still here, returning to campus as a student. Kathy's moved away, although I'm trying to entice her back to campus. We'll see. Jillian's going to stay close by, is also graduated, but is going to continue the work that she's been doing as a student close geographically to us. And so I'm going to turn over the floor to her, and this is her bio, and I'll give you the link as well. Go ahead, Jillian. What's your why?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So for me, my why, I guess, starts, so I started with a couple friends an initiative that's become a larger thing called Thrift to Fight. And we started last summer, during Black Lives Matter protests, as a couple of friends and I, weren't able to go to protests because of health reasons and because of immigration status. And as young people without a ton of money, we tried to get creative of ways that we could support protesters and support the movement without being there in person. So we got together, raided our closets of things that we hadn't been wearing a lot, and asked friends for donations, and did a thrift sale on a porch. And that led to doing 16 sales in like pop-up sales, selling thrifted, secondhand, donated clothes around the Hudson Valley, and raised, I think through last fall, over $15,000, donating 100% of proceeds. And today I just did the final tally. We have raised over 24,000. So it's all through donated clothes. Thank you. And so for me, starting Thrift to Fight, it's all been about ways that we can support and amplify the work that's already happening. So I was part of something that I see all around me, which is, a lot of people, especially at BARD, are so supportive of progressive causes and activism as a concept. And then we don't always know what's happening in our own communities, in our own counties and cities. And so these pop-up sales are not only an opportunity to divert waste from the landfill and raise money for important causes, but also to help people get connected to activism that's happening and resources, that are happening in their own community. So something that I'm really passionate about is being a facilitator for those things, just bringing people together, amplifying causes, and just creating more dialogue about what's happening. So that's where I'm at. I'm really excited to stay in the Hudson Valley going forward and continuing to learn from all the activism, like activists and organizers that are here, and continuing to learn and amplify. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jillian. Next, we have two student leaders who are turning into, I would say, staff leaders, because they have now officially joined the staff to run their project. Sister to Sister is the next student-led project that we're adapting to an institutional project. And Sakina and Skylar will be the ones who are going to be trying to make that happen. It's their student project that's now being moved to the next phase. So first we're going to have Sakina Bennett talk about her why and Sister to Sister, and then her co-lead, Skylar Walker, will go. So I'm going to put in Sakina's bio, then I'll put in the link to Sister, and then I'll put in Skylar's bio. Sakina, what's your why?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sakina Bennett. I'm a recent grad of Bard College. I'm also a Posse Scholar from Atlanta, Georgia. So growing up, I grew up in a single parent household with two little brothers. And what really got me through, and I can say that got me to this point in my life, were my mentors and the dance teachers and the women that poured into me. A lot of times I had to step up kind of as a second mom in the house. And so there was just a lot of pressure and stress that just comes with growing up in single parent households and being in Atlanta, and just all these different spaces and all these different factors. And so when I came to BARD, I saw brothers at BARD, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. I love the work that they're doing, but where are they doing this for young women of color? I don't see this for little girls that look like me. And so I went to Skylar with the idea, and I was like, yo, we need to start this. And she was right on board. And every time I go and interact with the girls, every time we have a conference, I am reminded of my why, because there is a lack of arts education, especially in low income communities where mostly people of color are residing. You see little to no arts education. And if it is, it's not they're not teaching them ballet. They don't have ballet classes at their resource. They may have a hip hop class, you know what I'm saying? But they may not have resources to ballet classes or tap classes or these other techniques. So my why has just always been those little girls, because I just want to be to them what I always wanted growing up. I wanted a big sister, and I, just really always craved that sisterhood. So to be able to bring that to the community and to be able to see the girls flourish and be able to tap into their true gifts and powers are my constant why.
Thank you, Sakina. Skylar, what's your why?
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Skylar Walker, and I also just graduated. Whoop whoop. I am from Atlanta as well, and I'm also a Posse Scholar. And I guess my why has come at several different stages in my life, but it all starts at home for sure. Just having to look after my little sister the way I did when we were growing up, because my parents were always at work, so I relate to Sakina in a certain extent of just having to, pick up extra responsibilities around the household. But also, I guess my why came from my extracurricular activities. I was a Girl Scout, and I also was a youth leader at my church for a couple of years. And I got to build really close relationships with young girls of color. And just I got to see my impact with which helped me realize my worth in my community, and to see exactly how far I can take things, which I didn't get to take it as far as I wanted to because I had to leave for college. But, I still have relationships and strong connections with the same people I met doing the things that I was doing before I went to school. And when we started our project, I guess the same thing, the relationships and bonds we're able to hold, and seeing not knowing how much of an impact you have in someone's life until they tell you, until they're able to express oh, doing this activity and doing this certain thing actually made me feel this type of way and let me open up and express this thing I've never felt before. So I think it's much like Sakina said, just seeing that the proof is in the pudding, and doing the work is what makes it all worth the while and answers the why for me, for sure.
Thank you, Skylar. So I'm going to open the floor up for any of our panelists to start with. All of you have been incredible students and sort of active student leaders. And as Johari said, many of the students here have participated in student government, have been peer counselors, have been student athletes, have done other aspects of student life. In addition to their running their projects. And so I want you to talk a little bit about the connection or the link between, the academic work that you pursued, your on-campus leadership and your community activism. How is that all tied in together? Because sometimes I think we uncover really interesting things about aspects of learning that people have identified as really critical or important to them, and how they've enacted them outside of the classroom. And I think you find some really unpredictable and exciting kinds of connections that people are making for themselves. So I open the floor up to anyone who wants to kick it off, and then maybe popcorn style, just call on the next panelist who wants to start.
I can go. So I did the dual degree program with the Conservatory and Human Rights. And first and most obviously, the human rights degree was so helpful in, I think, just questioning everything. We have so many discussions in human rights classes about all the intersections of issues, but also, what are potentially unintentional causes of harm in humanitarian efforts and different things. And so for me, entering this community of activism in the Hudson Valley, constantly, asking where can I do the most good, and what can I, what could cause harm without intending to cause harm. And, those are the types of questions you always have to be asking yourself. Even if you have the best intentions, it's always about reflecting and revising and adapting. So that's one thing. But actually the music side of things is also a place that's been really interesting for me, because the 4 other people on the core Thrift to Fight team, 2 others are also musicians. So Masha Zabara was in the conservatory studying cello, and Colin Lewis was just in the APS program for clarinet. And we actually met because we were in a woodwind quintet. And so we all have that intense classical musician sort of thing. And Gordon is also a BPI alum. And so we're all together, BARD affiliated and doing this work together. So yeah, definitely something about being musicians is also just the intensity, I think, of of musical training has also come into this work that we're doing. So yeah.
If I may, I'm going to take that, Jillian, and run with it and ask Sakina and Skylar to respond, because they're both also artists and a lot of their focus is on the arts. And so I think that's maybe a connection that isn't always made between civic engagement, even though we have the human rights and arts programs, and that's something that we at BARD really see as critical. That's not maybe a traditional avenue for civic engagement at other campuses. Sakina, do you want to go first, or Skylar?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, so dance is like my everything. Dance is like literally like dance is at the center of everything that I do, every single thing. And so I started dancing at a really young age, and I'm kind of like the first artist, I would say, in my family. And so it was very hard for my mom to be like, my mom's in the medical field, so it was very hard to be like, oh, this can be a career and this can be something good. Like, you can go do this. So like I had a lot of dance teachers that took a lot of convincing for her. But growing up, especially in classical dance training, I was in so many cases the only person of color in a lot of classes, the only woman of color in a lot of classes. And I think my experience in the classroom, was very traumatizing sometimes, to say the least, just because of the differences in history and body type and all these things. And a lot of times I don't think it's purposeful at all. I think it's just perpetuated by how things have been throughout time. And so I really wanted to take that experience and change it. And how can we bring access to those things in these communities? So like I had to travel almost an hour away growing up to go get classical dance training, because in my community, it just wasn't there. So seeing all of those things, seeing how the pedagogical things that were, you know, like Jillian said, aren't intended to harm anybody, but just are inherently problematic sometimes, taking those experiences and being able to readapt those things in a way that can be productive for these young women of color here. And then just having amazing professors. BARD does a really good job in the dance department as of recently of bringing in a lot of working artists of color that are in New York City, that are in movies, that are in Broadway, that are doing these things. So being able to teach the lessons and the confidence that they instill in me, and translating that to the young women that that me and Skylar work with. And how can we do that in a creative way where we're not only touching in the arts, but we're also touching on mental health, college and prep awareness, and all these other things, confidence. And so, yeah, my work in my classroom, because my classroom is dance, is always in forever just feeding into one another. I don't think it would like work for me, and I don't think I would be as passionate for the work if it was any other way.
Skylar?
So I guess my story is a little different than Sakina's, because I'm a singer, I'm not a dancer. So as a musician, I feel like it's definitely been a interesting journey for me, and it's something that I'm still, discovering till this day, because music is just something that's always changing, and something that's, I don't know, something that you really have to do your research on, as far as like equipment and just there's a lot of little different niches in it that all added up into one thing. And I think coming to BARD really helped me personalize my artistry, and help me realize like who I want to be and how I want to show up, which translates into my work, or into the work that Sakina and I do, because it teaches like young girls that they can be whoever they want to be and do whatever they want to do. And I think it also leads into other things. Like I was teaching a singing class for a point in time, but music isn't always something that everyone can pick up on like automatically, So I don't know. I think paving my own way and finding my own footing has been the most difficult thing, but it's also the most promising thing, and it's just like a small part in what it takes to, like, you know, to be the person you're meant to be. And I think that's the most important message that we're trying to teach through our program. Like, you can do whatever you want to do, but, you know, you have to find your own kind of way of doing it. And I think Sakina and I both have done that beautifully. Like, I've been able to release 3 solo projects since being at Bard, I think 4 actually. And with each one, I learned something new about myself and about what it takes to make music, which is something that I can carry into all aspects of my life. So yeah, and I think another thing, I wanted to go back to the why, because our program in general is just like, we're trying to be your sister figures that we wish we had during this set time in our life, during high school or middle school, you know, and just giving direction to the next generation and encouragement, really, because that's all it takes, is a little bit of encouragement and support. So yeah, that's a little bit about my artistry and how it ties to the work we do.
Thank you, Skylar. Beautifully said. Jahari and Kathy, is there things you'd like to add, the sort of links and connections between your academic work and what it is that you're doing in the community?
Yeah, definitely. I think the thing that comes most to mind is the emphasis on collaboration. And I've been very lucky with my time at Election at Bard. I've been surrounded by other incredible student leaders. And also we've been lucky in that Election at Bard sort of has a history at the college that goes back generations of students. So there's also this, you know, this legacy of student leaders as well. And I think that spirit of collaboration not only helps the work that we do at Election at Bard, whether that's to bounce ideas off of each other, whether that's, you know, to execute a voter registration drive, you know, the day-to-day activities. It's also something that carries into academic work, you know, in-class projects, or I mean, alumni here have all worked on our senior projects, and that sense of collaboration between oneself and their advisor, or oneself and other students within their major, I think has really stuck with me, and was definitely a learning lesson for someone who, you know, who wants to do everything on her own and who wants to, you know, figure it out by herself. That spirit of collaboration, I think, is incredible, both in the student leadership field, but also in the academic sense as well.
I think for me, it's been kind of 2 ways. Because I'm a joint major with international studies and Spanish studies through GIS, there was this first class I took when I got to Bard called Global Citizenship. It was a core class. And I think one of the main kind of themes or ideas or concepts that we learned from that is this kind of sense of belonging or idea of belonging, which I might have mentioned earlier. But I think applying that word to, you know, a major or a program of study that doesn't just apply to, you know, one country or one region or one space, but the entire world, it's kind of like, what does that mean to belong, or to feel like you belong? So that's one thing. And then also through Spanish studies, I started learning Spanish when I got to Bard. Actually, I learned Latin for 3 years in high school. So I think starting to learn a language that I can actually use to communicate with people, really a second language, taught me that, you know, listening really, and being able to hear certain words, both in English and Spanish, have meaning. And I think when you're listening in a conversation, I think there's always this, like, you know, there's this back and forth normally, but sometimes with communication, like, you can, you know, hear something someone says, and like that can lead you to think something, and then you go straight to that, and instead of responding to something that someone might have said. So I think language has definitely taught me to listen more, I guess, profoundly to others, and to hear their story, what they have to say, and how I can help them individually. But then also applying that kind of concept of belonging, and really being able to help others feel like, you know, even if they don't have a place or don't know where their place is, that they can find that, and that it's there. Really connecting it back to Sakina, you can, or not, Sakina and Skylar, you know, you can do anything you want to do. And yeah, I think also there's this Latin phrase, cura personalis, which I took with me from high school. It means care for the whole person, or care for the individual person. And I think that's also like a concept or an idea that can be applied just in thinking about institutions as a GIS major, how they, can apply foreign aid or use foreign aid to help marginalized group, just like any kind of organization can. I think paying attention to the individual needs of the person that you're helping is also something that can improve that sense of belonging, but then also through language, you can be able to hear and figure out what is actually needed to assist. So I think those are the ways that kind of my academic work has really combined or aided me in my civic engagement.
Amazing, all of you. I hope that you're all as inspired as I am, because I'm so lucky that this is what I do for a living, to be surrounded by brilliant people who challenge me every day to, as Skylar said, sort of how you show up. I think as a staff, we learn how to do that because our students show up so brilliantly. So I want to be able to open the floor up for questions. I do have other questions as well, but I want to make sure that we cover the things that you're curious about. So we're a small group today, so feel free to just unmute yourself and ask a question or make a comment or just, sort of connect with us directly. So I want to turn the floor over to anyone who wants to make a comment.
Hi.
Jonathan, oh, go ahead. Jonathan or Mark, you both, I think, put your hands up together. So
you go first.
Okay, I'll go first. So I'm Mark Nichols, class of 91. I'm really inspired by everything you guys have said today. I think it's terrific what you're doing. I'd like to know if how the attack on the Capitol on January 6th has affected you as people who are civically engaged, politically minded, committed to democracy. Has it just reinforced your commitments to each of these areas? Can you talk about that? I'm curious.
Sakina, go ahead.
I think things like that are really put into perspective when I go work with the girls or I talk to the young women and they have no idea about those things going on. And so it shows me how severe sometimes their reality can be and very present and very right in front of them. And it just makes me want to just pour into them a lot more than I feed into my consumption of media or hate or things like that. Because when you realize that their reality is so present for them, it's such a big thing. Some of these kids, like Kingston has had a lot of loss within the last year of young people in their high school. The pandemic, I've had young women call me who need help just with food, with getting around and different things. And so it makes things like that not necessarily unnecessary, but not necessarily at the forefront of what I feel like is a priority to worry about for me and the work and what the girls need. Because if they can't eat, they don't care what's happening in DC. You know what I'm saying? If their lights aren't on, if they're not getting good grades in school, if they're always in trouble, if they're being abused, none of that matters to them, And so sometimes I think we focus on this large picture and what the media pushes us sometimes, but sometimes the people right next door to us need the most help. And that's where we can have the biggest impact. Because at the end of the day, I can't do anything about, what's happening on the Capitol. I can't be there and tell everybody to stop. But what I can do is make sure that while things do persist and while that is still going on, people's lives are still happening and these young girls still need help. Right. So yeah, it hasn't necessarily changed it. It breaks my heart and it makes me want to go harder for them so that they can get to a place where they want to be involved in these things and they can be the lawyers. So I can raise up these lawyers that can fight that problem, or the next female person of color president to be, you know what I'm saying? Like it makes me just want to pour more into the community so that like we can kind of just shift the whole consciousness of this country. So yeah.
Skylar.
So are you asking both how it affected us personally and affected our project?
Yes.
Okay.
But more, how has it affected you personally? Does it make you more committed to what you're doing? Does it make you want to do new things? It was a big moment in our country, I think.
Right.
And because our democracy was attacked.
Yeah, so I'm actually gonna tell a story about this, if you all don't mind. So the day before the Capitol was stormed, my little sister actually received like a text message like hinting to what was gonna happen. And so the next day, like, you know, you go on social media, you go on the news, and then the Capitol was stormed or whatever. And then so it was just crazy. Like, and I think for me, nothing was really like before that point. I mean, the entire term of like Donald Trump was very eye-opening for more than one reason, but like I guess the obvious reason was just like, you know, we have racists that are comfortably coming out being that way. And I think that it didn't really hit home for me until like it affected me in a personal way, because my sister got a text message about this crazy thing that happened, or that's going to happen, and you never would think like, oh, like this is actually going to happen, but it did. So I think, like, just like Sakina was saying, the best way to combat that is to move in silence and to be persistent and to show that, you know, like, even though this is going on, like, we still have work to do. And I think much like, just like she said, it makes me want to go harder, because I think it really spoke to the privilege that certain people groups hold in this country. And it really was just kind of, I still think it's just, I still haven't really processed it all the way, but it's just like so much was happening during that time. But I think it really was an eye opener, and it showed like, okay, for me, I was like, okay, it's time for a shift. Like, because the way I look at it is I've surrounded by, you know, people of color most of my entire life. And I've seen us have to do so much more just to get, you know, in the same places as our white counterparts, but we have to do like 10 times more. And that's unfair. That's so unfair. And it's like, it's time to rewrite the narrative and, you know, up for things that aren't necessarily right, and to not only speak up, but to show like we are actively changing the way we want to be treated and the way we want to, you know, the way the status quo should go. Like we want to change that. Like, and I think that our program is doing that exactly. Like, we are showing these girls that they are equal, they can do just as much. But I think, you know, just as Black women and as Black people, we start so much lower, and it takes so much more like time, support, and effort just to get to where we have to go. So it is like Sakina was saying, like, that's not at the forefront of a lot of people, of a lot of, you know, young people's, you know, problems. Like, there's so much more that young people have to deal with, so much more that I was dealing with during that time in high school or in middle school, that the Capitol being stormed maybe wasn't the biggest thing, but as an adult looking at it, I think it's a huge deal. And I think it shows that it's time for a shift of power. So, okay. Yeah.
Thank you both. Well said. Jonathan, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you for the presentations. Can you hear me?
No.
Yes.
Oh. Yes?
Barely.
Barely.
All right, I changed gears. How about now?
Oh, much better.
Yes.
I took out the earpiece. Okay, thank you, everyone. Well, when I was a Bard student quite a time ago, we kind of looked at things a little differently. So my question is, where does civic engagement begin and end? For example, the US has the biggest military in the world, and this is starving resources needed for housing, urban development, fighting climate change. Does BARD have the vision that engaging in peace movements are part of civic engagement? That's my first question. The other thing is I just finished an article since I became an academic about how the universities contribute to climate change and can act as proactive actors with their material resources in food, transportation, and other things. Has BARD looked into its own footprint and how activism could change how BARD acts materially on the ecosystem? Thank you.
So I'm happy to respond on behalf of the institution, sort of what our institutional commitments have been, but I'm also happy to turn the floor over to students to sort of get their perspective on how they view how we're doing, I guess, around that. But I'm going to put in 2 links that will help in maybe a little bit of a shorter amount of time, or a way for you to be able to explore these things beyond just this short event. That the institution itself has made a commitment to be a private institution acting in the public interest. So we now have close to 9,000 students enrolled in BARD credit-bearing or degree-granting programs in public high school early colleges, the BARD Prison Initiative, micro-colleges, international programs. So the access to education is sort of how we're enacting our own, how we are being activists in the community, and we're actively engaged in trying to change educational policy and on a national level. So in terms of how we are acting as an institution and how we're linking across both secondary education and higher education, and challenging our peers to think differently about what a college campus even is, what the liberal arts can do, and where we should be creating access to the liberal arts, not just on our own campus in Annandale, but beyond that around the world. And then we also have the Open Society University Network, which we just launched, which now has 35 international and national university partners. And we're asking ourselves these questions. So a lot of our work is focused on human rights, is focused on climate and sustainability. And we think that we're better, we're able to leverage the knowledge, research, students, faculty, all of our resources towards addressing the issues that you're talking about if we're networked. And so that's part of the mission of Open Society University Network, is to start to link up universities and have us all acting together rather than acting as individual actors in certain, communities or geographies. And we've noticed that for students, it's critical in their learning, because they're taking classes with students in Annandale, but now students are also taking classes with students in Bangladesh and Kyrgyzstan and Russia and Palestine. And so they are learning with people who have different challenges than the ones they're facing, and how they problem solve, how they think together around a text, how they learn together, and their sort of globalization of an issue is enhanced because they're in a classroom with students from around the world. So those are options that BARD students have had now for a few years, but obviously that just grew in the last year during COVID, where students were able to and had access to classes with peers at all these other campuses. And then OSIN is doing a tremendous amount of work around sustainability and climate change. And a lot of the projects, we have 45 projects under OSIN in 1 year. It was announced last January 2020. And many of them have this focus both of civic engagement and of sustainability and climate and equality, frankly. I mean, the definition of what we're doing around climate has to include human resources as well, and equality, and address inequality and systemic issues that have long been standing. In terms of sustainability, access to education for women is should be one of the primary goals. So we focus a lot on gender equality, race equality, and frankly, a lot of the institutions around the world are in crisis. Many We work with 2 universities who've had to leave their home countries. We have another that's in crisis in Myanmar. We have, the world is, higher education itself is under attack. And if we lose some of those international connections, then I think some of those folks at those universities are lost as well. So, there's a huge amount of optimism in creating the network, and there's a huge challenge in creating the network and trying to actually support and act on the behalf of people who are in really serious situations. We have a lot of students from Afghanistan at our partner, American University of Central Asia. What's happening in Central Asia is difficult. So we're trying to act in places that, and be partners, real partners with people from around the world in a way to learn and address and work on behalf of communities in a lot of different areas, as well as be unpacking what's happened on our own campus. There's been a lot of discussion in Annandale around the systems of oppression that exist locally and on our campus, and how can we unpack that as a community and really start to, reimagine what this whole thing, this sort of higher education experiment looks like. And we sort of inform each other, students and faculty together. Sakina, you have your hand up.
Yes, you just made me remember something, and I wanted to go back to Mark's question. But Mark, exactly what Aaron is saying, and I don't mean to take over, sorry, other panelists, but exactly what Aaron is saying is like why there's an attack on our democracy every day. Like each and every one of us, you know what I'm saying? Like that was the physical representation of like seeing a group of people, go out and do something like that. But that is happening every day in so many different ways. When we talk about privacy on the internet, when we talk about access to higher education, when we talk about access to quality food, when we talk about healthcare for women of color, like there is always an attack on our democracy. That was a physical representation that was blown up in media, but it is consistently and always happening. And so that's why I think it's important that we are still always doing the work, and that we don't put so much pressure on these things happening in that way, but just that we remember that it wasn't a big deal to Black people, because my school has been raided before. You know what I'm saying? I've been through different things like that, where that has been the norm in some people's communities. You know what I'm saying? Where you have communities, homes raided for nothing other than just discrimination. You know what I'm saying? So I guess it could look as a big thing to some people, but then when you remember other people's realities, it becomes very small.
Do you think that here's on campus, is there now a stronger, as a result of the Trump presidency and the attack on the Capitol and what we've been through in the past several years, is there a stronger commitment on campus to civic engagement and to activism and to democracy more broadly?
In my reign when I was speaker as well about 2 years ago, a year ago now, I think. And I can definitely say during that point, I think is when, during my term, I saw a lot of things happening. We had some posters, but it was just different things that were happening. And I can definitely say that the commitment that those things have, yes, forced a new push to reignite that these things still exist and it's still present on this campus. And so, yeah, I can definitely say that during Trump's reign, for sure, I've definitely seen Bard. I mean, granted, my 4 years are all during his reign, but I've seen even the difference in, even the community, in Red Hook, there was this mural of slaves actually, and it's been covered up since. So I can definitely just see a new push happening, even security wise, yes, for sure.
Does everybody agree with that? Did you hear me?
I think mostly. I think it kind of depends. I think during, I guess, last year, everything that was happening, and I would definitely say, I wasn't on campus last semester, but I could see on social media, a lot of people were out doing things, especially in their own communities during the summer, just trying to get involved. And but I think now, I think, COVID is also a factor, which, we haven't mentioned much, but COVID is a factor in this year. And I think, Bard being a small community, but also us having a large number of international students or students that are just not on campus all at the same time. I think that might have shifted a little bit. I think it will probably take next year to kind of amp things up a bit, but I do think like organizations like CAPIs where we're focusing on voting, and also like TLS projects that are still active. There are still active projects, and still the CCE is still having active like projects and things like that. But I think it's still COVID plays a part, and I think yeah, I think when seeing how things go back to normal a little bit, I think that will definitely play a part in upping that a little bit too.
Mm-hmm.
Skylar, do you have your hand up?
Sorry, let me unraise my hand. So were you asking if we agree with that like changes have been made in the local area? And like I think that once the Capitol was stormed and once we got a new president in office, I think things definitely died down a bit.
Right.
But of course you're always still, I mean, even when the election was happening, it was just absolutely insane because it was just like you couldn't drive anywhere without seeing, I won't say drive anywhere, but there was like people who were very radical, of course, about what was going on. Like I was working at Dunkin' Donuts, and like every single shift, going and coming from work, there's people crowding the sidewalk with Trump signs, a crane up in the sky with Trump flag on it. I mean, people were really going all out. And then like afterwards, there's just like silence. And in a way it is comforting, like, of course, like, yay, progression, but also like, this is like the first time in history for me where people who were comfortable saying that they hate a certain group of people or hate a certain group of things like came out, you know what I mean? And like, I think that there is comfort in seeing that there's progression, because maybe there's progression because there's silence now, but is it really progression? Because we didn't correct the action of these people who came out crowding the streets saying that this is that and that and this, like, oh, I'm not, Black lives don't matter, Asian lives don't matter. There's not really a correction of behavior, so there's not necessarily progression. However, I feel like having our programs will create progression and combat the ideologies that these people have, formed about certain groups of people and certain ways of living and things like that. I think it's a tricky question, because like it's easy to say yes because the eye can see, okay, there isn't as much craziness as before, but what is actually going on? You know what I mean? So there's always the what if, and I just wanted to kind of put that out there. There's always work to be done. That's all. Yeah.
Thank you, Skylar. Mitchell had his hand up, and Catherine, you've had your hand up.
Mitchell, go ahead.
Oh.
You're muted.
Hi, I said, hello, everybody. You don't know me. I was a Bard student way back next to all of you. I graduated in 1976. It's kind of funny because it feels like it was yesterday. But anyhow, and I'm now coming to the reunion and just sticking my nose in a few different places to get a sense of what's happening at Bard. I mean, honestly, I was at Bard when, before Leon got there, quite honestly, to give you a little sense of historical perspective, and when he was there. But I'm listening to this conversation, and it's very engaging, and it's wonderful to hear all of you think so intelligently about some really important subjects. And I wanted to pick up on something, even though Sakina left, of that what happened on June 6th, and I was just so glad to hear everybody talking about this, is something that actually happens in possibly smaller versions and iterations all the time, especially in Black communities, and not only in any number of different kind of underprivileged communities. And I think that's a real important point that for us all to digest. And so we're talking about a kind of an encroaching on our liberties and on our democracy. But I want to just point something out that it just occurred to me this way, because on one hand, we tend to, and I'm going to get political for a moment, point our fingers at the Republicans for taking away voting rights and doing these utterly insane retro Jim Crow style activities legislatively, and the whole thing about the big lie and all of that stuff. And it's utterly, completely threatening, as far as I'm concerned, to all of our liberties and freedoms and democracy itself. But I also want to point this out, and this is where I would love some of your feedback. I would also suggest you, and we all take a look at, the same thing happening on the Democratic side, but there is this faux compassion that is being expressed through this whole idea. And here's the trigger word: vaccinations for all, as though that's the only way out of this COVID story. And I'm going to suggest, and whether you accept it or not is okay, but there have been numerous other drugs, actually, besides natural approaches to dealing with any number of viruses, including COVID. And that has been completely 100% marginalized by our great agencies like the CDC and the FDA for different legal and for-profit reasons. So I'm not going to go into all that stuff, but I just want to bring up the subject. Are these thoughts that any of you are having, or have you all just bought into the story of what is being perpetrated, if you will, and promulgated by our government, who we have had good reason not to believe for a long, long time, maybe since its inception?
Skylar, you have no, it's not. No. Okay. Go ahead, Skylar.
I think this is like, okay, so I feel a lot of different ways about the question that you just asked, because I feel like as a Black person in America, we don't really have a side that we can choose. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
there's not really, we can't fully depend on the Republican Party. We cannot fully depend on the Democratic Party.
Even as a white Jewish person, I don't have anyone I think.
Exactly. There's a lot of people who feel as if none of the parties cover, we all know that it's things and specific people who choose to partake in it because of the benefits. Really, that's what it comes down to, having a certain benefit over another group of people. And I don't know, for the longest, I just gone back and forth with the fact of like, what if nobody voted? What if we all just, but that's not the reality of the situation. And the reality of the situation is making your own sort of way out. Like, once again, it's finding the gaps and finding the holes and filling them with what you think will work for you. And despite what everybody else is, because these are systems that have been in place for years. And granted, they do get worse. We do have updates to certain systems that make it harder for certain groups of people. But I think through it all, there's always ways around it. And it's a matter of finding that way and acting on it and using your resources and knowing that, okay, now that I'm disconnecting myself in this way, it gives me an advantage in another way. And I think it's definitely hard to see when you're in the midst of all of the craziness, especially the pandemic. I mean, I think it wasn't even, the pandemic wasn't a health pandemic, but it was also, it exposed a lot of poverty. It really showed like who was where. And I know we always refer to this thing called the middle class, especially in America, but there is no such thing. It's either you got it or you don't. And if you don't, you have to figure out how to get it. And for the longest, it has been hard for people to figure out how to get it. But I think now people are becoming smart about what needs to be done and actually taking the steps to do it, because that's the only way to break the system, doing something differently, because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And that's what's been done for so long. And that's what we've been told we need to do for so long. But why, So I think that's the answer to my question, just being bold about it and sticking beside it and seeing it through. That's going to be the best outcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Skylar. I want to turn to our other panelists to get a sense, because in some cases, the election of the Bard group is not partisan. It's been very nonpartisan and trying to just access to understanding how government works, because I think what contributes to the issue is that a lot of people aren't taught how government works. So I'm going to have Kathy talk a little bit about that, because I do also want to be mindful of time. And then I want, Jahari, I want you to talk a little bit about why you ran for student government, because I think access, like there's actually lots of information about people who run for student government who end up running for public office later on, and sort of who's running and who's in the pipeline is important, and why, like it goes back to what your why is, Jahari, so think on that a little bit. And then Jillian, you got involved because of the protest last summer, so sort of acting in that moment. And then there are different ways to act in order to address in creative ways, as Skylar was pointing out. They're like, we don't have to always replicate or do the same things as we've done before, and so we can address these things sort of differently and in different and do it through coalition building and networking, which is a lot of what we try to emphasize in our work. So I'm going to go Kathy, Jahari, and then Jillian, and I think then we might be getting our marching orders to wrap it up. So I think that's how we'll, yes. So Kathy?
Yeah, definitely. Hearing Mitchell's question and then Skylar's response brought up a lot of thoughts in my head about like what Election at Bard does and why we do it. And particularly to the point of, distrust of a bipartisan system is something completely understandable. And I mean, especially working with Election at Bard, you sort of you learn quite a lot about just the bread and butter of what these things are. Like, when are voter registration dates? What are, the procedures to do this and that? And New York State, up until a few years ago, had, in terms of the 50 states of the US, had quite a backward system in terms of accessibility to voter registration and voting policies. So it is understandable as to why people become distrustful of a system that emphasizes two parties as well. And something that we wanted to do as a group to engage in that discussion is to really discuss local politics and the impact that local politics can have as well, and voting in local elections. And not just voting, but what is voting in conjunction with, the activism that inspired Jillian to start Thrift to Fight? What is voting in conjunction with programs like Skylar and Sakina participate in? Voting is not the end all be all, and we don't want it to be. We want voting to be, especially for young people, we want it to be something that starts the conversation about participation and something that continues to occur on the local level, on the state level, in conjunction with these other activism and advocacy efforts as well.
Thank you, Kathy. Jahari?
Awesome. My question is about student government.
Well, I just was trying to, you did run, you elected in this moment to run for office, technically. So, but you feel free to answer whatever aspect of this you want. I was just trying to sort of frame things to help us,
I think that it's kind of going back to like the question that was previously asked. Like, I think about like how much I can do as one person, how much impact can I make, even with a team, how much work can be done. And I think over the course of being at Bard, I started off, like trying to be really involved and like thinking about, being speaker in the future and like what that would look like, but then also not focusing on that, because I think the bulk of what I really wanted to do is like what I said before, have an impact and really help others, fully, realize their full potential through the different, I guess jobs or ways I've engaged on campus. Like I've been able to do that. But yeah, I've also realized that, at one point I was also, I guess, student body president in high school. And then I thought like, wow, like, I think during that year, I put a lot of pressure on myself to do a lot. And because we were like we were the first graduating class. So it was just like the first time we had a full school, and there's just like a lot of momentum and a lot going on. But then I realized I had to like dial it down. But now after kind of studying GIS and Spanish and watching, just observing other student leaders do their work. And again, that Latin phrase, cura personalis, being able to give holistic, individual attention to an individual, I think it's really taught me that in this role for speaker, one of the things I want to do is kind of really aligned with starting with the why, actually, with this concept of what's your why, because I think going through BARD, we were able to, you know, go through the academic traditions of L&T, citizen science, going through a really intentional process of declaring our major in moderation, but then also having this very physical example of our work at the end. I think sometimes there are students who do have a kind of clear idea about what they want to do after, or what their purpose is, or what their kind of role is in the world, and maybe have a good sense of what their role is in the college. But then there are some or many who may not, and I think that's something I definitely want to help with in figuring out a really systemic way to, like, for all students to be able to question themselves of, you know, what is their why. I really actually, Simon Sinek, who wrote Start With Why, really just love his work. TED Talks is when I first heard him speak one time, that's really when I fell in love with TED Talks, actually. So I think that you know, that question is important in any organization and any kind of individual person. Like, why are you doing what you're doing? What is it that you want to do with that, and how have you kind of gotten to that point? All of these, you know, great questions, and I've been able to think about that a little bit, and definitely something that I want to really spread to the entire campus, so that when you're doing these different, like, intentional processes of, you know, being introduced to the college through language and thinking, but then also leaving with this, you know, senior project or thesis that, you know, they can use in grad school or go to, you know, in their next position with, or to start a fellowship with. You know, like, what happens after that, or, you know, even then when you've done that, okay, what is your why the same, or did you know it beforehand? Yeah, and I think, you know, there could really be some, I guess, tangible, I guess, results from that. I think BARD does, again, it's really about what was said earlier, building upon what's already been done. And I think BARD does really provide that really great structure for students to think about their place, to think about how they want to make an impact, but definitely through my role, I want to kind of make that a tangible process for students.
Thank you, Johari. Really gave me a lot to think about, and I'm looking forward to working with you this coming year. Jillian, you want to wrap it up for us?
Sure, and can you remind me?
Well, we were talking about sort of this action, you know, we were sort of talking about the challenges of this past year and really what it came to light, and you decided to act. You made very deliberate decisions to act in a very particular way that someone might not necessarily intuit, you know, because it wasn't in this sort of bipartisan, wasn't going to the protest. So you want to sort of talk about the sort of innovative, or the ways that we're going to break some of these systems by maybe acting differently than we were before.
Absolutely. So you know, all of this started with us wanting to fund organizations that are working at the intersections of queer liberation, racial justice, and disability advocacy and rights. And so, you know, I was a dual degree student with, you know, flute performance and human rights, and I ended up starting a public benefit corporation. We thought, you know, in starting Thrift to Fight, it was just going to be like a summer thing. And then we realized that through this work, there's so much excess clothing. There's such an endless desire to shop and get new clothes, and a need for affordable clothing. And we realized that, you know, the sale of secondhand clothes could be a sustainable funding mechanism for social justice work in the area. So we created, this is all about, like, the why driving so much momentum forward, because I kind of got a bootleg business degree on top of the other things this year, just by, like, learning so much, Googling things. And Masha Zbara, who's, you know, co-founder with me, was took, like, a business class, and we're part of the Hudson Community Incubator. You know, we thought we were going to start a nonprofit, and then we ended up learning about, you know, this endless cycle of fundraising that so many nonprofits, you know, part of the nonprofit industrial complex, are part of, where they're reliant on, you know, very exclusive and prestigious grants and restricted funds, and all these things that are so many obstacles to getting, you know, that get in the way of them fulfilling their mission. So we wanted to be a funder, and a funder that is reliant on people in every step of the process. You know, it's not reliant on, like, stock market or someone having a trust fund. It's reliant on people donating clothes, people shopping for clothes, learning more organizations collaborating with us, partnering with us, and sharing information about the work that they're doing. So this whole thing is going forward. We actually received the Davis Project for Peace grant, so I want to share with all of you, we're actually on tour right now. I'm not at the sale at the moment, but we are on sale 5 right now, currently in Buffalo, of a 9-city tour in New York, where we're doing pop-up sales, partnering with 3 organizations and hosts at each in each city. It's going to culminate in a city in Brooklyn, doing a sale at $3 bill on Juneteenth, raising funds for